It was still dark when we gathered for breakfast at the B&B.
Okay, we're all sitting. 1 hour, 30 minutes on break. Yeah. But you know what, they're running from Peter Maritzburg.
Our host's TV showed the early progress of the annual Comrades Marathon Road Race.
Our grandfather on the cover cup. That news is uncovered in 1895. Oh, sweet. What is his name? Arnold?
John Arnold.
Oh, you're named after him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're heading to Franskop.
We drove in convoy with Sue Greenberg and her translator, Michael, leading the way. Beyond Durban's faded colonialism, Hindu temples appeared as if out of nowhere. A reminder that Natal has the world's largest Indian community outside of India, and of its connection to the cultivation of sugarcane, starting in the 1850s.
Sounds music there.
Travelling north, fields of sugarcane blanket rolling hillsides. The day's journey would take us deep into rural KwaZulu, the home of the Magwaza Potters, where we would spend the next 3 days immersed in their traditional pot-making process. Further inland, lush fields gave way to an arid landscape. Driving was challenging, with steep ascents and descents. Livestock wandering at will, and excited children scouring the shoulder of the road for the scraps of sugarcane that fall from passing trucks.
Look at the clay colour. There's a darker one. You see that? Oh, lovely.
We dropped off our luggage at St. Catherine's Golf Estate, the closest available accommodation to the Magwaza homestead near Franskop. We would be spending 3 nights here in simple wooden chalets with breakfast, picnic, lunch and dinner provided.
I have the same feeling as when we went to the Way of Tea. What does it mean? It's like we have to pay the same respect for a different culture. Yes. Just as a way of their way.
Approaching Franskop, the road narrowed and the hills got steeper. The cliffs that give Franskop its name tower thousands of feet above the Tugela River Valley.
We're going to walk from here.
We stopped briefly to take in the view, beside a tiny house and a store selling water. In 2003, many settlements in KwaZulu had no running water or electricity. Beulah and Clarissa spoke a little Zulu. This would stand them in good stead over the next few days. Entering the valley, giant potholes eroded the tar, which vanished entirely after we crossed the river, perfectly accompanied by the Cuban rhythms of the Buena Vista Social Club. Visibility was often so poor that Franz used the wipers to see through the clouds of dust. stopped for a picnic lunch on the banks of the Nsuzi River. Large plastic containers were being filled with drinking water. Nearby, taxis, bakkies and clothes were being washed as cattle waded peacefully in the shallow stream. Approaching the Magwaza homestead, the dirt road dwindled to a bumpy track.
Look at the broken ones there.
Sue's car was instantly recognized from her many buying trips, and as we came to a stop, people and pots appeared from every direction. Embarking from the bus, Chieko immediately engaged the children with a formal greeting. Having grown up in Japan and spent time in the United States, Africa was for her novel, exotic and exciting. She took a deep dive into the experience. We found ourselves in a sea of radially symmetrical pots, all variations on the theme of ukamba, the low-fired burnished clay pots made for the serving and drinking of traditional sorghum beer. The Magwaza Potters were well renowned and accustomed to visits from prospective buyers. But our visit would deviate from the usual business model. There would, of course, be some sales, but I had asked Sue to arrange for us an immersive learning experience in which each of our group would receive individual instruction from one of the Magwaza Potters in the making, decorating and firing of a pot. A large rondavel had been prepared. Shoes were removed and we filed inside. As we settled into the space, I asked our interpreter, Michael, to inquire about the origins and processing of the clay.
When it's dry, how it look like, eh?
Yes.
Mama Esther, the matriarch of the Magwaza family, explained that a red and a black clay are collected within walking distance of the homestead and carried home in buckets. Dry lumps of both are then combined in small increments and ground to powder on a large flat stone, similar to those used to grind mealies. The older potters learned to recognize local clay deposits in the same way that they learned to make, decorate and fire their pots. They were taught by their mother-in-law. Observing the range of ages participating in our project, it was clear that this knowledge continues to be valued and passed down through succeeding generations of female relatives. A communal work song began as Mama Esther demonstrated the clay grinding technique. We were to hear this song several times over the next few days. The words refer to the planting and harvesting of madumbis and sweet potatoes, but celebrate all things that come from the earth, including clay. On Sue Greenberg's advice, we had brought many plastic buckets as gifts for the potters. These were very well received. But our gift of Lieberman's terracotta clay was a mistake. Accepted graciously by Mama Esther, it caused her nothing but problems. It was completely unsuited to the Magwaza coiling technique. Seated on the floor around the wall of the rondavel, Each of our group received individual instruction from one of the Magwaza Potters. As I had had the camera focused on Mama Esther's demonstration, I could film little of the beginning of the pots, which by now had all reached different stages. For the sake of clarity, I have taken pedantic license with the footage that follows, cutting and sequencing it to illustrate the steps taken by the Magwazas in their pot-building process. Zulu speakers will consequently find the conversational soundtrack oddly out of sync with the visual order. To begin the making process, powdered clay, to which a small amount of water was added, was wedged to a workable consistency on a piece of cardboard.
This is already mixed. Okay, so
the wedged clay was then formed into a ball, flattened, and patted into a round shape to form the base of the pot. After the edge of the base was pinched up to create the first level of the wall, the base was placed onto a piece of cardboard, which would facilitate rotation during the building process. Soft clay was rolled vertically between the palms with a slow rhythmic movement to create long coils, which were then pinched onto the wall in the form of horizontal rings. The vertical rolling technique was unfamiliar to our group and proved to be way more difficult than it looked. The Magwaza clay was soft, sandy, and highly plastic. The clay we had brought was firm, dense, and fine. Mama Esther had immediately foreseen the difficulty and mixed it half and half with the local clay, but the mixed clay still lacked malleability. The amount of pressure required to join the coils distorted the radial symmetry of the form. It was mortifying to observe her struggle, while perfectly symmetrical round forms, made with local clay, emerged with ease all around us. Once the wall had reached its maximum diameter, the inside was smoothed using a rounded piece of calabash, and the outside with a straight, tapered mealie cob. Moisture content was closely monitored. The wall of the pot must be soft enough to allow the applied coil to be pinched onto it, yet firm enough to accept the addition without distortion. Strips of cloth or hessian were used to achieve the correct firmness. The potters who used wetter clay used the strips wrapped around the rim to absorb moisture and dry out the clay. Those with drier clay used wet strips to moisten the rim.
So is she trying to dry it and this one's trying to wet it?
The Magwaza spoke only Zulu. Without the benefit of shared language, instruction relied on demonstration and observation. Sue and Michael were kept busy, adding bits of English translation to the mix. But even they were sometimes confused by the subtlety of the techniques. Building commenced on the upper half of the pot once the right moisture level and firmness were achieved, the convex form reducing to a fairly small mouth. As the circumference decreased, great care was taken with the inside joints, which could be felt but not seen. The attached coils were compressed with a mealie cob from the outside, while fingers resisted the pressure and controlled the form from the inside. The radial symmetry of the form was the result of a fixed vantage point above the pot, and the repetition of a sensitive rhythmic pinching gesture, which joined the coil onto the wall as the pot was rotated on its cardboard support. The repetition of both gesture and rotation affected the regularity of the form. What made this experience truly extraordinary was the total inversion of the historical relationship between black and white women in South Africa. During colonial and apartheid times, the role of black women within the dominant white culture was limited to domestic service. Due to economic inequality, virtually every white household could afford to employ one or more black women as nannies, cooks, and cleaners. This placed the lady of the house in an executive position, her main responsibility being to manage and instruct her black workers in the niceties of what were then called European norms, to keep the home running smoothly. The disparaging classification of pottery as a housewife's hobby had its roots in the resulting availability of means and leisure time for generations of white women. Ironically, it was the commitment of these so-called hobby potters that propelled the local development of studio ceramics through the formation of the Potters Association of South Africa, which hosted exhibitions, workshops, and competitions, raising standards and the public profile of the medium. Some of our group were members of the association, yet here they were, seated on the floor as novice learners, in an atmosphere of trust and respect, while the highly skilled Magwaza Potters, poised and generous, instructed them with the empathy and firmness one would use with a child. From my limited vantage point, on the floor between clay buckets and feet, Myra, an experienced architect in the real world, was having the most challenging time. But good grace and Myra's great sense of humor got her through. The Magwaza clay dried quickly to leather hard, allowing the form to be refined using a straight edge of metal or plastic as soon as the maximum height had been reached. The use of a CD was novel and surprising. The scraped surface was then smoothed with the addition of a little water. Mama Esther's skill proved to be no match for the intransigent clay we had brought. Her valiant attempt lacked form and symmetry. Its demise at the hands of two of the senior potters was fitting. As work progressed, discussion turned to the decoration of the pots, the next stage of the making process.
Then tomorrow it should be ready for decoration.
It was agreed that we would return at 9:30 the next morning, by which time the pots would have dried sufficiently. When the rim had firmed, the mouth of the pot was finished by a combination of cutting and compressing as the form was rotated. Adding a small amount of water aided smoothing.
Oh.
Witnessing the sensitivity, dexterity, and ease with which the circularity of the mouth was effected was mesmerizing. I found it hard to look away. Later, Ati remarked on the attention to detail that the potters had shown throughout the process.
The thing is, what impressed me was that they were so meticulous about what they were doing as well. You know, in other words, they were absolutely, keen to finish it off and sort of to work it again and resolve it and sort of work on it and work on it off. Not just sort of like letting it be. There's a very specific idea of what they wanted to, and they were doing put a lot of effort into to achieve what they want to do.
The sun was low in the sky as our work session concluded. The pots were left in place to dry. To the delight of the potters, our group bought several of the pots that had been laid out for sale. Unsold pots were being carried back to the huts of their makers as we said our farewells and began the dusty, bumpy ride back to St. Catherine's.